Okay. Well, I actually wanted to see, now that I see Jim, that you're here. Um, would you like to show off what you've looked at with Veil?
Oh, I'd love to.
Sweet. In the meantime, I'm gonna start a PR for the meeting notes in the docs.
Okay. Anyway, I'm still contributing to the user guide, and yeah, it's Derek. Oh, it's looking forward to learning more about automation. It's a marketable skill, and yeah, and he said, oh, try out Veil, and he wrote like the issue for it, and it was really easy to set up, and I've been doing some cool stuff. So if I can take over the screen, let's see. And let's see. There we go. Okay, basically, how you set up. There's there's Veil proper is the it's the free command line tool, and Veil server is this desktop app you have to pay for. So, but I think pretty much most things you can do with the CLI. And anyway, you basically set a directory for where your styles are, and there's different alert levels. I think there's suggestion, warning, error, whatever. And then you can, based on some patterns, you can just say what styles you use. And you do one, or you can chain a bunch of them. And a style is pretty much it's a directory with a bunch of YAML files. So here's one, here's acronyms. You say, oh, if you got one of these goobers, say, oh, consider spelling it out, or spell out first and then use it. Here's a M dash. So you're on space between numbers, you dashes between numbers, it's supposed to be an M dash, no spaces. So who knew? And here's Latin. You say, oh, I guess if it looks for EG or IE somewhere. So stuff like that. And lots of regular expressions, which is a black art, which I should learn more about. And yeah, you got Google. Yeah, Write Good is supported. Oh, and Proslint. I want to share some one I love. Here's animal labels. It's like, don't use bird like, use avian right here. And let's see. Oh, this is my favorite, corporate speak. Here, don't use at the end of the day, back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Something we all need, right? Synergy. Anyway, so yeah, I went to the Salt Style Guide, and the one thing it says is, oh, except from his heading, use lowercase master or masters, or salt master service, use master service. Just little things like that. I'm sure that'd be expanded on. So
do you know if
yeah, it's all pretty simple to set up.
That's awesome. Do you know if when you're using that swap, if you're able to say, because right, there'll be instances where maybe this sentence starts with minion or something like that, or masters or minions. Do you know if there's like a if that swapping seems to be smart enough to go, oh, if it's at the start of a sentence, it's supposed to have a first letter capitalized?
I'm sure there's some regular expression you can use. I can do through like some of the other ones, see how to do it, but I'm sure
This is
sufficient
cool.
ingenuity, you can do something like that.
Yeah, this is really awesome. And this is kind of exactly the type of thing we were hoping existed and that people were using it was open source. And so the fact that this has a bundled in option for Google style guide, because we say we use it.
Yeah.
And again, it's been that problem of us going, wow, it's a giant book of info. And I I've not read it, and there's no way in hell I'll memorize it. And so having a tool that goes, hey, I'm actually checking all of this stuff is a huge deal. So this is really, really cool, and would be another really good tool in the tool belt that we'd be able to start with in the Salt user guide before starting to roll out into our other doc stuff.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
You said
the
that you
Google
looked
one,
at HTML.
yeah, let me show you in action. The first one, the Google's, it's not officially supported by Google, but the same person just wrote it. So I'm sure that can be
Sorry, yeah, that's what I meant. Is it's using the Google style guide, someone who converted pieces of it right into the automation, not Google themselves.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so anyway, I've been just running it on the HTML itself, but I'm sure you can do it on the raw RST. So
Yeah, I saw in the docs it said they support the raw RST, which would be awesome.
yeah, okay. I don't know how the rules will be different, but I'm sure like a lot will be similar. It's just me text with different tags on the end. Here's just run Veil, and this is just the path of the config file, and I used here's states from the user guide. And it shows
But I only see your editor right now. Are you doing other stuff?
I gotta change screens. Okay. Share. There we go. Okay, you see that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you're using Windows and PowerShell. Forgot.
Right. Yeah, there's some way of integrating it within VS Code. But I think it just gives you a terminal window.
Yeah.
So I'm happy just
I know.
do
I
it
think
this
this
way
is.
for now.
I think this is good that it shows that it also works on Windows, because that's been part of our tool belt problem at times, is going, oh, we've known to test this on Windows because none of us here are using it.
Okay.
And we just hope that it works on Macs normally, because some of us also don't have Macs. So
Okay. It looks to be supported for all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it's just kind of Choco, Veil, and it does work.
oh, good, good. I'll put that in my Choco like little scripting directions.
Okay, I'll send you guys a bunch of links. But okay, here's where it hit. Here's the the message for that rule, and here's what rule it used. Here's Google, and use the passive rule, and then yeah, here's like warning level suggestion.
Turn off instead of disable. Avoid using these. I think this is great, because this will be the little feedback that we could technically. So I saw a GitHub action. Of course, that won't impact our GitLab projects, but I could probably look and see how they run it. But I noticed that what they'll do is they'll include this in like a pull requests like discussion, so that they would see like, here are all these suggestions, because that's all they are suggestions in most of the time, which is why like we can't necessarily have it in a pre-commit, because pre-commit would be like, if I find something, I'm going to stop this because you got to do stuff. I don't know if pre-commit can be all like, here's a bunch of, well, for one, people would skip it, I think, if it just dumped text in the middle of its like test output. And so it's almost, I'm trying to think of like, outside of the VS Code thing that you might see, and not everyone uses VS Code, but there could at least be some kind of, I don't know, some kind of way of running it and getting the extra output for someone to see something like this specifically on the files that they're editing, which will be interesting.
Okay. Well, how is it different than running Knox? So do you run it and then you see a bunch of
that's a really good point, is having it
that's my yeah.
Okay, that's a really smart idea, actually, because then instead of having it built in the pre-commit, having it as a Knox output. I like that.
Okay, cool. Here's okay, this
How
is
does-
using the alt file guide. So,
I
yeah,
assume,
so
I assume there's VS Code integration and it will actually provide these suggestions within VS Code, right?
um yeah, I haven't got it set up, but yeah, I think it just has, yeah, it'll just output the terminal window. I
Oh,
don't
it's
know
just in the terminal, it's not in the, because most linters, when you integrate them with CS Code, will actually provide you the suggestion or the error actually in the code window, not just in the output.
Oh, okay.
Maybe,
Oh, that'd be
yeah,
cool. I'll
maybe the
check that out.
developers
Yeah.
have, yeah, maybe the developers of Vail haven't got that far yet. Or no one's written that kind of VS Code integration yet, but I don't see why, at least for people who are using something like VS Code or I don't know what PyCharm or whatever, why there couldn't be you know, quote unquote linting for this right in the window.
Yeah, it'll depend on, I put a link to it in the Zoom chat. I know that when I looked at the extension very briefly, as in I only looked at the page, I didn't try it out. I saw that it supports both Vail and Vail Server, their paid product. So I can potentially see the CLI option being like, oh, this has less integration purposely. In the event that Vail Server is their way of somehow adding the additional linting. Because it says, hey, if you're using the CLI, change this to true, but I don't really know how that might change the developer experience versus what Vail Server is supposed to supposedly provide. Because see, there's some great looking interactive usage.
Oh, Vail Server only.
See, yeah, Vail Server only. That's exactly what I thought. Is they're gonna be like, we're gonna charge for that piece.
Okay.
But the other
First one's free,
pieces,
kid.
like you said, would be the terminal output. That would at least be not as great of a developer experience unless the person pays for Vail. Vail Server.
Yeah. Oh, but I can check it out. But
Cool. No,
anyway,
well, I think this is really great so far because I already foresee a separate repository that we would create inside of that same doc subgroup in GitLab that would have that salt YAML in it for the salt style guide. Like I could see it growing so that then any other project, any other docs project could import it into Vail and always have the latest style guide. And I think that's going to be really nice with, especially as our docs keep scaling and with our docs as code approach with all the micro projects we're going to have going.
okay. Yeah, for now, I just created a .vail directory next to Knox. So I don't know how we would deploy it, but
yeah, I can figure something like that out. We probably have something in the contrib guide that just says something like git clone this down into, and maybe it just dumps into .vail. And we'd have to just make sure that the git ignore files include the .vail directory.
sure.
So
Yeah.
that we're not accidentally throwing that in.
Is there a git hook for not pre-commit, but like a pull or something that could pull from another repo as well?
Yeah, you can. Yes, if you have a CI pipeline, you could be like, hey, pull that down and provide the output. You could then have it. So then people could go into the CI pipeline to look at the output if they wanted to, which would actually be really helpful for reviewers, is they'd be able to just go and look and see perhaps that extra information. But what I've seen GitHub Actions doing, they'll dump it directly into the PR discussion, the output, with like a bot. And so I could see that being like step by step, the progression of like going like, how would you, like, I've not seen how people do something like that in GitLab yet. I've really seen a lot of that done in GitHub. But that would be really cool. Because then you're always getting the latest, whatever the latest changes are in that style guide repo, pulled into the CI pipeline in case the local developer doesn't have the latest and greatest. Yeah.
Or I mean, the other option, does Vail have the ability to just pull it on demand from like a URL? Like if you could just host it like just host it on GitLab and they can pull it with HTTP or something. Like Veil directly pulls the style guide rather than having to clone it locally.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. Is our contrib guide could just I don't know, we could have something, some step for people. The problem is if you don't use the CI, you'd be able to just do direct calls to HTTP. Yeah, if it's just a YAML file to like bring it on, or yeah, that would probably be faster than you're not doing any Git cloning of it over and over. But I guess locally, for the local development, the Git clone seems to be the best option because then they're not having to remember. Or, well, actually, no, Knox could do it because Knox can keep a cache when Knox does it. Well, then it's in the Knox cache though, and not in your local. And we can figure that stuff out later though. But this is awesome, Jim. Thanks for taking a look at getting an initial look at what Veil can do, because that's totally what we're looking for.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, I just want to, I just want to be useful. So I'm good.
No, what's really cool about what you're learning is it's applicable to any other project that uses docs as code, because
Sure.
Veil supports so many, I think they said Markdown, RST, maybe even just plain text and HTML, as you've seen. And so, yeah, that's huge. And I've seen it talked about it at places like Write the Docs and like conferences, but I've never tried using it before. So it's actually really cool to see that. And
So is it like the new thing now, or did it just come out recently?
last year was the first year I heard of it, but I don't know how long it's been out and around. But it's the only one that has come up when it's come to style guide. I mean, I've heard of Proslint, but Proslint's like history is a little bit. There's some of these projects that, because they're all open source projects, they're in various states of like maintained or not.
Mhm.
And Proslint, in addition to some other ones, are just sort of, they don't have the community as much as Veil seems to have grown and contributors. And so if there were others competing, it looks like Veil's kind of taken the lead, and just showing how easy that was that you just showed with
Yeah.
simple YAML configs like that. I can understand why people are wanting to adopt it instead of something that you're having to dig deep into code. The less you have to dig into code, the better. And I've done tons. I have a good regex history, so I really like that they have the regex support, because I was already thinking about, they got to have one in there for IP addresses and style guide IP addresses, because if Google says they have to be these IP addresses, and if you're doing domain names, example.com if possible, that would be really hard, because sometimes you're actually linking out to an external resource, so they probably don't have one for that. But for IP addresses, I bet if they don't have one, you can. And if they don't have one, you could create a regex for like if the IP addresses are not these ones and the string equals this value. And I'd love to get something like that into our tooling, because we just don't. And one thing I noticed is, I wonder if they have things like, I've seen people run into problems with smart quotes, but like if you're on a Microsoft system editing, it'll add quotes that are completely different at times than, depending on whatever your editor is, than any other system adds. And that causes problems with tools. And I mean, that would be an instance for me doing a pre-commit fix, because I would want it removed out of the code, not a suggestion. But no, I should put that in that automation issue.
Okay. Well, I was thinking.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. But Zoom is just really confusing. I was thinking about just on the RST land, right? Yeah, actually, I'm learning a lot from doing the copy editing and all this from the Docs Jam, and things like modules. Maybe it's in a certain set of modules, then make sure it's surrounded by double back quotes or things like just kind of like the kind of doing Yeah, checking the actual formatting
Yeah.
things, looking for those strings.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking with pre-commit. Because then someone's not even gonna be concerned about it. Like if they put in the smart quotes and they're not aware that they just did it, pre-commit can just run through and just replace it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for some things you'll want something where it's unambiguous as to what the answer is. You'll just want to fix it, like a block for text.
Yeah, exactly. An opinionated thing that just goes, whenever you do this, I will replace it. I'm not going to suggest it. I'm just going to do it. And then that'll make it so it removes work from everybody and we won't accidentally add. I mean, a lot of the other pre-commit stuff is doing this, like preventing anyone from accidentally putting merge conflict artifacts into their text, preventing anyone from using, there's like, I have 2 or 3 pre-commit options in there that are specific to Windows developers where UTF-8 encoding can get wonky. If you're using VS Code, it generally avoids it. But there's things like even carriage returns and stuff on Windows versus any other system. UTF-8 with the bomb was one problem I used to run into a lot in the past with PowerShell developers, but that's pre-commit's catching for that too.
Okay. Well, pre-commit currently, is it just flagging things or will it actually
No,
replace things?
It'll replace it. It'll
Sweet.
check through. Yeah. So the cool thing is it'll go through Python code examples and it'll format it to the black formatter. It'll look at any Python code in the repo and it'll auto format it to the black standard. It'll do a lot of that other formatting stuff of with trailing white space, all sorts of things that could be invisible. Pre-commit will just, before someone even actually pushes their commit out, if they have it configured properly locally, it'll catch it and fix it, and then they just have to commit again, and then they can push the change with all the auto remediation. And if they don't have it set up locally, our CI pipeline, the very first step is to run pre-commit. So then it'll go, oh, you didn't run pre-commit on this. I found a bunch of stuff. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, the other thing we could use this for is stuff like the step 28 stuff, the inclusive language stuff.
Yeah,
think
yeah,
there's-
in the SALT style guide. Oh wait, what was
I
that?
think it's in the Google one, maybe.
We
Strange looks
could.
less than convinced about the viability of step 28.
Oh my gosh. It just
Yeah.
is so daunting. Like I read it and it looks really simple and I'm like, I don't even know.
Yeah. Well, there's two.
I don't even know how to get
Well,
started.
one thing I do know is that there's language specific stuff like Jim mentioned from the Google style
Yes.
guide. That's generic stuff. When it comes to
Right.
SEP 28 though, that's such I want to call it a nightmare in a way of, it would just be,
You
it would
said
be,
it, not me.
yeah, I said it because it would be such a incredibly, for one, it's the entire code base. So it's Python code, doc strings, it's anyone's wrappers in any environment
Yeah.
where they're doing stuff with the master, they will all break. They'll just all break upon an upgrade. And it will be, that's why I say nightmare, is it's going to be horrible for support, for anyone who's contributed to the code base,
Well, I
for
think we'll have to
all of us doing
do,
things. It would have to be
I think we'll
very
have to have
slow
both
multi-year
words.
rollout or something.
right. I think in some places we're gonna have to have both words and then deprecate. Because there's no other way that it's just gonna break everything. But we'll have to piece that out and how that's gonna work. And it's so daunting that I go, when they make us, I'll do it.
Well, the other problem,
But
the
some
other
of the inclusive language that we just have that goes into like docs, that's a really good place where we can do this, where we can say, oh, we're going to replace, like, I don't love this word. We talk about it all the time that they say, we're not going to use execute anymore. We're going to use run. And I'm like, okay, but that's a good example where we can just say, so everywhere take this out and then we'll go through it. But for us, that's not a good word because we're going to
yeah,
then run on the runners, some more run
but
modules.
I also don't know, that's such a big conversation there, because I don't know. For one, there's a lot of SALT deals with third-party projects. because it deals
Right,
with.
so
certain
there's some
pro-
stuff we can't do. it
Yeah,
with.
yeah. So there's a variety of stuff that will still.
That's
be
why
there.
executor's not great. But if we could replace single words in one document that way, I'd be okay with that. You
And
know, like
once-
if we're doing just like the user guide or something where we're more distributed, it might
It's-
work. But
Right.
it is because it does have that like effect of, okay, so now I've changed too much or changed the wrong thing.
Yeah, because
right?
someone also pointed out things like, Windows executables. I mean, that's how you even
Mhm.
talk about Windows and you have exe. This is an executable. And so there's certain things where you just have to say that I can't do
Right, you can't
anything
just
here, and I don't
replace
know
them.
what I'm
Mhm.
supposed, because then now what do we do with our documentation referencing these things? Do they really?
Right.
I don't, and so I don't know how much. I feel like I would like to, with maybe some SALT people, talk directly to the board or people associated with some of these things, because I don't know. I don't.
Well,
We can do that. Yeah, that's, so in those links that we have that are internal, Derek, we can suggest some things that are specific to our project. Like they did that for Kubernetes. And so we could do that. We have to get involved. And so I've been hesitant to put my name in the hat because I'm like, do I really have time for this? No.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's one of those things too, where it's hard to find the time to get involved and know how much time it will take. And then if we don't, it's just going to come down the pipe saying, well, you didn't talk about it or object to it. So now you have to implement all of it, which will take even more time.
Well, I don't know that they'll do that within VMware. I think there'll always be an exception, especially for us in open source. But
Okay.
I do think that we'll need to eventually, like, somebody needs to be involved. It probably will be me or Janae, and we'll start to have some of those conversations about, but this doesn't fit in our code base.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We can do that. And I think that if we even just say just that, that's enough for us to say, but we'd like to have an exception for our project.
Okay. Yeah, because I think
I just put the link there. But what is a step 28? Hope that's not like
No.
rule 34.
No, SALT enhancement proposal. So there's a process by which you can suggest enhancements to SALT, and it's in a GitHub repo. And one of them is step 28, which is a proposal to add inclusive language. So there's a lot of terms in SALT that could potentially be considered offensive, like whitelist, blacklist, master, things like that.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases, there may be some good alternative words, but I think but in other cases,
Not always.
people have used that term because that's the correct, most accurate term, right? And because SALT uses so many of those and actually distinguishes between them, like runners and execution modules and executors, like those are three terms that only have one, basically one suggested
Right.
replacement, but you have to be able to distinguish between them, right? And there's some terms like executables that Derek just mentioned that are so embedded in computing history that it's like, it's Windows, right? Like, or anything that it's just like,
Right.
you can't get away from it.
Yeah. And I've wondered about addressing that with this, it's a committee run by a lot of people in HR that sit on some sort of inclusion board that I'm like, and they've just said, you will now start replacing execute with run. And I'm like, that's funny because you work for an engineering company. I'm pretty sure people aren't doing that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to know. Like, I'd really like to get insight into how some of these are decided, because I don't know. For one, I never have seen that anywhere before. Like I've never seen a board come up with something community wise, and maybe it's because I just don't have insight into it. I do know that VMware joined with a whole lot of other companies, including the Linux Foundation, on a giant open source initiative, which is why this impacts us.
Yes.
They weirdly titled it something like "We want to eradicate all this," which kind of was okay. But I don't know what.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I should look at what the title of that was, but I don't really know. It's yeah, that's a whole different conversation. But when that does happen, I don't know how we're going to implement it other than we get the benefit of simple style guide automation with defaults
Mhm.
from Google. We technically could take, I think Microsoft might even have some, there's a Veil one for Microsoft. And I think Microsoft might even have certain things listed, which means we potentially could use multiple of those if we wanted to. So for generic language outside of very salt specific stuff, and then maybe later when it becomes salt specific, I could see our style guide saying, if you see instances of the old one, flag it
Mhm.
in Veil. I might even go as far as at that point to use something like pre-commit to swap it.
Maybe.
It's just going to be hard though, because
It is.
yeah, it's going to be interesting.
That one,
But
I think,
did I
the
put the
SEP
link in the
actually,
chat?
yeah, the SEP actually came in during a time when that was really being headed up with the open source communities in general through GitHub to just change your main branch from master to like main.
Yes.
And I was like, how about we just approve this and just change just master the branch? Because that's not nearly as intrusive as some of this other stuff, and say, we'll do that. We'll make a plan.
Yeah, that's what's
But
hard
nobody
about.
else is approved. Nobody else will go in and approve the SEP. So I'm like,
Right. That's what's really hard about that as a SEP, because you don't even know what it means. You don't know what the SEP really actually means. The SEP says, do this with language.
right.
And you're like, okay, this is
It's
incredibly
broad.
nuanced and
Yeah.
broad. And so people are just like throwing out random terms for replacement words for maybe salt master and other things. And yeah, it's
Mhm.
like well, here's actually a question I always had is I was wondering, the board that does this, do they actually then approve funds for engineers to go and do this? Like, it'd be great if they, the
It's a
weird
great
thing I
question.
wonder
We should
about is
ask.
whether anyone has skin in the game kind of concept, because it's really easy to go, hey,
Yes, please change this.
please change your
Right,
entire
yes.
code base because we think that this would be bad. And we don't know what that actually even equates to in dollars. And,
Right.
and we don't even, and we're not impacted by the cost of it. And because
That's actually
I
a
bet
really good question. I think you should
Yeah.
ask that to one of those links. There is just a general ask HR somewhere in the midst of our new internal stuff, and you can just ask a question. I think that's actually a really great question, because I mean, not only something like that, are we even thinking about the cost that's going to come with this? Is the value going to outstretch that?
that's the huge one for me. Is VMware, for
It's a big one
example,
for
has
me.
a large foundation for donating money. And
Yes.
if they actually did if they figured out, oh, it would actually cost us much to change all these words. And we don't even know how to maybe measure the impact of like positive impact we think this will have.
Right.
It's a weird thing. And if their thing is, oh, we're going to pass the cost of it down to you.
Brilliant, thanks.
And
Yeah.
it's really easy to make decisions then, because they don't have to go
It
to that
is.
next step.
It is. It's sort of like now that we're with a big company and I've been invited to, I don't know, 12 all hands this month. And I'm like, so how many of these do I actually need to go to? Because they're getting kind of expensive. Right? Say the same thing over and over. And I'm like, so I'm gonna skip this 12th one. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean, right? And it's the same
Totally.
thing. It's like, but are we getting some value out of this? And I would like to push back when we think we're not. I think that's a great idea. I totally will back you up in that. I'll even see if I can find a place where you can ask that question.
Sweet. I'll definitely be part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to ask that and hear what they say.
To be cynical, sounds like it's Rule 28, right? If it exists, someone will be offended by it. But you know,
Kind of,
it's
yeah.
yeah, how much pushback is like even possible? Or
I mean, some of the stuff is low hanging fruit, like whitelist, blacklist. There's some stuff that's inherently salt based, and like it's really painful to change. And there's some stuff that is sprinkled throughout the docs and the code base, but that could easily change
Sure.
without a lot of repercussions, right?
Yes. Yes.
Agreed, which is why I see the benefit from how Veil already has some built-in ones that are just kind of language specific in the way that our docs might be talking about things. Like that alone is already a pretty straightforward one. And like you said, the only thing we could potentially run into that would be weird with blacklist and whitelist is that if SALT changes it, so SALT is meant to unify. It's meant to make as unified a experience as possible. So your SALT states, if a tool, let's say a tool has blacklisting and whitelisting. Well, if you change SALT to not use it, but then that tool uses the term, you now will have states that say blacklist and whitelist, and then you'll have other states that will use whatever the alternative term is, unless you try to abstract it. And then if you try to abstract it, then that person might be a little confused because they're used to that tool's way of talking about it. And it adds that weird additional layer of complexity from a developer experience and them kind of even knowing, because they'll be like, I've never even heard of this with my tool before. Oh, it's because it's abstracted away the term that this tool uses. And then if they even try to change it, we'd actually have to push back at that point. It would be a weird conversation, you know.
But that's where that board that is the Linux Foundation and VMware's on it, and they're trying to come up with some industry standard words so that we can have some, you know, likeness across the board. I think that's where they're trying to go with it. Although I'm not as aware that that's actually how that's coming down to us, right? To us, it just seems like, please change. And it seems
it will be interesting.
disjointed.
It will be, I mean, when we pull stuff out into SALT extensions and other people own things, well, I don't know what, I suppose our best, we'll be able to give people things like Veil and stuff, but it's really going to be up to any maintainers of their own extensions, unless it's underneath the SALT stack org too, I suppose. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting.
Questions.
The low hanging fruit piece though, I like that Veil automatically can point stuff out. And if we ever really wanted to, if there were cases of where this suggestion seems as something that should always be replaced, then we could try looking at other avenues. But it gets weird when you think of the absolutes, because the absolutes that are what introduce breaking changes on accident.
The low-hanging fruit was on the corporate speak list, so.
Oh, wait, what's the suggestion?
I don't know, it just says don't do it. Okay. Oh, the other thing I learned was the term lint actually applies to dryer lint. Yeah, I was looking up the guy who invented in Bell Labs said, oh, it should be like, you know, the little filter in your dryer that traps all the lint.
Yeah, it like gets all the crap off of your code. And
yeah. Oh, there you go. There's. I know it's just some weird acronym, but no, it's lint.
Ah, I see. So it's like your shirt. You have a black shirt that's full of dog hair or something. You're using the little sticky roller.
Yeah.
No, it's like coming out of the dryer before even gets out of the dryer. Kind of it's the pre. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pre-commit
Awesome.
kind of thing.
Awesome.
Anyway.
Cool. Well, actually, on that, so what's interesting is some of the stuff we're talking about when it comes to so inclusive language. That same issue for the style guide, we include a thing about the accessibility tooling, because there's a whole broad spectrum of things where they talk about language, but then they also talk about accessibility on, does this include, do images include captions? I'm sorry, include alt labels and stuff, depending on people's readers. And that's another tool that we do want to eventually look into. That is CLI. One of them I found that is CLI based and open source and is cross-platform, and that's also on that same issue. So that'll be cool to see that. So where am I going with? Oh, so now that we talked about Veil, I did want to show progress that we're making with templating new projects, and because we right now have two tools that are coming out of SALT project. One is SALT extensions, because And so there's a tool that will create a brand new project for a Salt extension. And that means bootstrapping it with docs. And that's same with pop create. Someone makes a new pop project, a new item project. We bootstrap it with docs, and not just docs, but as much of the testing suite as possible. That includes everything we're doing in pre-commit, everything we're doing in the Knox file. In the future, I suppose it would be also Veil related stuff. But it includes all this stuff so that we're trying to reduce the barrier to entry as much as possible, and to have it as self-documented as possible. By self-document, I mean how if someone is doing their doc strings inside of their Python code too, that it will generate the docs from their comments, as opposed to them needing to now duplicate their efforts. And I'll show a quick example of doing this here. And I actually talked to Pedro. I have a scheduled time with Pedro sometime soon for us to share what we've learned creating templates for pop on me and Tyler's side, and creating templates for Salt extensions on Pedro's side, so we can make sure everything we've learned we're adding into each other's projects, instead of like Pedro's doing all sorts of awesome test automation. I want to make sure I get that into the pop projects. So yeah, let me share my screen actually. Okay, so pop create is a tool that is pop on GitLab. It's also published to PyPy, and so people can install it to do it. We've done so many changes, I actually have to update the pop create docs soon to include all these changes. So, oh, I was gonna paste that into the chat. Zoom, come on, Zoom. Okay. Now, if I go into let me just make a new project here. I think there's one I was doing, yeah. Improve docs, because this is my fork. I'm working on new changes to it. And you simply run pop create in a brand new directory. Actually, I should just do this in a terminal, so it's full screen. Okay. Yeah, so I did pop create in here, and that created this entire directory. It creates a default contributing file, README file, the requirements, pre-commit, Knox license, it's Apache 2 by default in the license that it does. And I'll show what the docs actually look like when they're rendered, because I have the docs import the README and the contributing guide and the license file, along with the different default setup. And if you've noticed, we've started moving everything to the Firo theme because it's better than the Sphinx material theme that we have, the Salt Stack fork. It has a lot more support. The people working on it are kind of like Python Foundation fellows, and they've rolled it out for PIP's documentation even. So it's getting a lot of love where Sphinx material is not. Okay, so I generated it, and let me check. Oh, if you remember, there is actually a different Knox feature I've added. I think I added it to both Salt install and Salt user guide. So if I do docs, Noxy docs, if I do Noxy docs, that uses Sphinx auto build, And what Sphinx Auto Build does is it allows for a nice developer experience. And I think I showed this on the Twitch stream before, where it just kind of creates it has it running so that as you edit your files, it will automatically compile it over again. But the idea is that this is the starter template they get. Because it's a POP project, that means every POP project should at least have certain things in it. All POP projects should reference POP documentation. Because if someone comes to look at this project's documentation, they may not know what POP is. There's a high likelihood they don't know what POP is actually. And so POP we have links to what they would need. And I use a to-do directive inside of Sphinx to try to give people a walkthrough on, please fill this out. If you've noticed the reason I'm doing all of this for both the contributing guide, because that's the other thing, I took a lot of things we learned from the Salt user guide, from the Docs Jam, and placed it into the default contributing guide. Because people can modify this and extend it based on what they're creating the tooling for. If it's a particular API, for example, they could add to it. But the default is they need to know what Nox is. They need to know what pre-commit is. They need to know how to set that stuff up. They need to know how to use Nox to generate the documentation, to run tests, to contribute to the repository. And so I have that whole baseline in a generic version of kind of what we've had with the Salt user guide. And I import the license, for example. And the goal then is the problem is, let's say we're on GitLab and let's go look at some open projects. I think we got one called Packager. No. That might be POP. Yeah. So here's Packager. This is an open source project. Packager has nothing. It was, and so even though the source code is open, there's no contributing file, no README file. And so there's no way to know what this does. And that means either technical writers or other people are coming in to then try to figure it out and research what it means and build the documentation out. My goal is that can we instead have it so that there's a baseline setup, because this is pulling from the README RST, which is what would be there. At least then, instead of just being completely empty, we'd have this entire walkthrough here. And it would mean that someone starting the new project would have guidance, because that's been the main problem is people who are writing docs, they have no idea where to start. They know how it works and how to use it themselves, but they have no idea where to start often, or they don't think about it. And so this is to make it pretty obvious and clear, because there'll be lots of to-do items. And it gives the basic prerequisites. How can you have the tool installed and running locally? Like if this was in Packager's docs, this would be better than what they have. So this is the goal of what we're trying to do with our templates. I'm continuously adding more stuff as they come along, like releases. I'm working right now with Pedro on, we use Town Crier for Salt, and Town Crier helps actually compile everything and do a change log based off of little files that were added in the PRs over time. And you can actually use automation with Nox to build out this release page based on what's been done in them. And that would be far better, because then people aren't stuck trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, I see that I have stuff for Town Crier, but what extra steps do I got to do again now? Yeah, so this is the progress of POP Create for all new POP projects. And we're going to do something similar where I want to have these kind of improvements added to Salt extensions docs after I kind of work with Pedro to see how he's doing the Salt extensions. And but yeah, what's cool is everything that Gary and Jim, both of you actually, as part of the Docs Jam or as part of really the Salt user guide ongoing efforts, a lot of what we've learned is what's gone into this baseline for brand new projects. So really cool. I'm really excited about it because if people actually start creating more item projects and pop projects, I'm only showing you the docs. It has its whole testing suite set up. It has the git ignore file with everything it needs. It has some coverage and Pylint type settings in place, I think. And I think there's a GitLab CI file for those who are having it on GitLab. So it's just a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be incredibly useful. I should actually probably put the broke URL validator job in the GitLab CI now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, that's kind of what's going on that front. I'm going to make sure I put in the notes here for what we're doing today. Docs Hub. So we got April notes going on. So then everything that we've talked about today has been talking about Veil, talking about the SEP 28 and potential integrations, or what would you call augmentation by Veil could make this easier in the future. Same with pre-commit. Same with combination of pre-commit. And then the other thing we talked about was I just talked about pop create. What other things did we? I suppose that was really mainly it, right? We kind of did a tour through Veil. Thanks, Jim, for that. And then talked about SEP 28 and what things like Veil and pre-commit could help with, depending on whatever where that route goes. And then pop create and salt extensions. Templating, documentation, baselines. On that note, I actually do want to show a link, unless I'll show a link just quick, and then we pretty much can talk about anything for the last few minutes here. There is an excellent project out there called Hypermodern Python. And that is, where is it? Here it is. I'll share this in the chat and in the notes. I've kind of went and looked at this project. I kind of wish I would have found it much earlier. I think I'd heard about it a little bit from somewhere, but what they're doing with, for one, guess what? They're using Bandit and Safety and Sphinx and Poetry. Poetry is the long-term future goal that I think we want to get some of our projects using, and instead of our weird pip compile dependency handling that we're using. But this project's already doing all of that. And I took cues from here for like Sphinx auto build. And I mean, Safety, I'm probably going to take a version of what they're doing with Safety. And Safety, by the way, is a dependency tree lookup where it looks at your dependency tree to see if there are any CVEs impacting packages in your dependency tree, because that's going to be a huge thing needed for Salt in the future, or really any project that uses something like Tiamat, because Tiamat will be bundling your entire dependency tree instead of having it installed on a system where then the system handles the management of updating it. you'd have to then ensure your packages are fully updated if you're using Tiamat, since you're bundling it in. So anyway, I did want to just share that because that's a really cool project to learn from. That's doing a lot of the things we're doing in our projects and more. So yeah, kudos to them on that.
Yeah, that could be really cool as a kind of templating for Salt extensions, because basically they include the entire CI/CD and all. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's wild. I honestly was thinking, wow, could Pop Create use something like this? But Pop Create was purposely created as a Pop project instead of like a cookie cutter project. And as a result, it means it's coded entirely differently. But it does import the cookie cutter package to do all the Jinja and placeholder stuff. But Salt extensions can go straight up with this, especially if Pedro sees. Pedro has been waiting for some specific updates to come into Poetry, and they've just recently been merged into the code base for Poetry. They aren't included yet in a released version. So like the Knox file in this project and all the dependencies, the Knox file is dependent on Poetry inside this cookie cutter setup. And same with the dependency tree is using Poetry's approach, which stores all of that inside of the Pi, what do they call it? The Pi project, TOML, or whatever the heck that format.
Yeah, PyProject.toml, yeah.
Yeah. So something really cool to look at, because if we could just take advantage of what these, I do know that this one's built specifically for CLI tools using a very specific sub library that this person liked using, Click or something like that. But it can be modified totally to do lots of cool stuff.
Very cool.
Okay, we're getting to time here. So I'll include links to all these things we talked about today inside the Docs Hub at some point. I have a meeting directly after this, so it's probably going to be a few hours later or something. But yeah, thanks again, Jim, for taking a look at that stuff. Thank you too,
If I could
Gary,
add one
for
more
always
thing.
being part of the conversation. Yeah, what's up?
Oh, yeah, we talked about sort of different things to look for. Maybe in the issue, just give suggestions for just possible tests, because I'm sure I can just kind of pull around for things that would be useful for us. You know, wheels that other people probably invented. Definitely the inclusive language, but there might be other things.
So wait, say that over again. What do you want? Or what do you?
Oh, I'm
asking
sorry.
about?
Think maybe things like inclusive language, just other things that might be useful. So there might be other styles I can kind of pull from other places, just to, not reinvent all the wheels.
Oh, and you're veil testing?
And veil testing, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know. Which is why I think it's great that you saw. I saw when you were scrolling actually through the Google one that it had stuff in there. I can't remember what they were titled, but that would be related for sure. And I do know that there's a Microsoft one out there that probably, I don't know how well, I imagine Veil can be extensible to a point where you could just take specific rules or pieces from those other styles to use. But it'd be interesting to see where they overlap. Because I don't know where the heck Microsoft and Google overlap on things, or if Microsoft covers certain things, Google just doesn't, and vice versa.
Okay.
So it's like, oh, well, what about getting the best of both worlds? Because I know some people who use a combination of the two somehow. They somehow can keep it in their head, but it's because they're tech writers who are deep in that tech somehow. And there's no way I could do that. But with something like Veil, it can seem as though I'm using a second brain to offload that. Awesome. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. And next week, I'll be trying to do a Twitch stream again, if all things work out, on Thursday. And then the working group again the week after. All right,
Thanks.
have a good one.